In your time and development within these tanks and within the virtual reality training programs that your minds are hooked into, there are always occasions when you will have a quirk. This quirk could be considered a flaw in the ever escalating pursuit for corporate perfection as one ascends higher and higher to the planes of the human psyche and what is thought to be the perfectly organized mind, most actionable mind. You run into an ever increasing just mountain of human flaws, whether it's errors in thinking or fallacies that continue to persist or phobias that can haunt those who are particularly obsessed with one topic. Your quirk, your flaw, your gimmick, whatever it is, your obsession. This is a thing that an executive has. In some of the more publicly presentable executives, you'll notice that they tend to carry these out or show them as almost like cartoonish sort of character traits. For example, aside from the fact that he was involved in a rather traumatic battle, Rich Tan is obsessed with the number four. He is obsessed with the number four. It is his thing. He has four wives. He wants four children. There are four of him. He likes the number four a lot. It has very little to do with his job as well. He just likes the number four. So your quirk or your flaw doesn't necessarily have to be something that's connected to who you are. I mean, like as far as an executive goes, but it is something that basically every executive has. Jeff's case, for example, he has LDD and isolation issues. Lewis is extremely tired all the time, mostly because of his stand power, but he's also a very repetitive person. At times, he just goes through life being beat up by robots and eating chips. He's stuck in a rut often. So, and his particular flaw, I feel Lewis is that one is a little bit more tied to like what he does and also his stand ability because programming loops, all that. It's just kind of he does repetitive things sometimes. It is a thing that kind of like shows a crack in the corporate armor sometimes. Your executives or you're not quite executives yet. I'll explain the corporate structure because your characters would understand it kind of like as part of their programming. Basically, you are considered to be, as I said, middle management, which puts you above the usual lower worker drones. They don't even bother making those in tanks. They're either people that can be hired or they're robots. Either way, they're not of any concern. The bulk of their resources go into creating middle managers, upper managers, and then eventually executive material, assistants to the executives, and then executives, and then finally a chief executive. Above all of them, supposedly, are the shareholders. Your characters start out as middle management, which is considered to be not necessarily the lowest rung of the corporate ladder here, but it's like if the corporate ladder goes from 1 to 10, you're 2, and 1 is at the bottom. If there's 1 below you, it's probably people who are on probation or otherwise considered to be in need of some rehabilitation. Those employees who maybe haven't necessarily completely invalidated their existence quite yet, but are on their way to doing so. The exact thing that Jim's character would be afraid of, going back to the tanks and then being thrown into. Because if you go back to the tanks, you automatically go back down to that level. If they have to draw you back, call you back, you're going down to that. You're busting down right there. If they don't just like fucking soup you right away. Which soup, you might as well work that into your parlance. Souping is when you get disposed of. You're liquidated. You're done. There's no coming back from being souped. Obviously, you are just actually turned into soup.
Ooh, delicious.
All that having been said, your time in the tanks likely had some impression upon you as to how good or relevant or productive it was. There is, by the way, in the corporate training, you will see at some point that they do have like materials like that. And there is like kind of a crude drawing of Jason with a little crossed out thing over his face. It just says, do not make friends with, do not listen to, only destroy. Thank you. Please see him off of the premises. And whenever they say the premises in their corporate parlance, they mean the moon. Make sure he leaves the
all of the moon.
premises. Yes, the entire moon. You would also see in your, by the way, whatever background information that you're given through your corporate virtual training. The survivors are also in there, and usually their profile just says like approach with caution or ignore or be careful, watch your belongings around, do not like have any fingers near the mouths of certain people.
Who? Who gets that warning? I have to know.
Probably like Jim and Marisol, I would say, like keep fingers away from mouth.
Oh,
What?
Yeah.
Away
I
from
would have
Jim?
guessed Mia, but
Yeah, away from Jim. Oh no, for Nia, just they all usually get the message ignore.
Ignore! Oh no!
Oh god.
And for Jim and Marisol, it's because they're from Earth mostly, and they have like questionable backgrounds legally. So it's like, oh, these are just wild, dirty Earth people. Careful around them.
yeah, their mouths are full of diseases. You gotta stay away from them. They don't know what toothpaste is on the earth.
There is maybe within each of you a secret wish that you harbor that is suppressed by corporate programming. This is not necessarily your flaw, and it isn't necessarily how well you gel with the corporation, and it doesn't even need to be a huge, burdensome secret. But it is something that you want, or wish, or can do, or have an inclination towards, but does not fit the corporate ideal at all. Some examples of this would be obviously stuff like Rich's strange sadomasochistic tendencies, Lewis's want for just kind of like peace and relaxation and lounging about, not very corporate, Jeff's love of doing like weird off road stunts and kind of self aggrandizing. It does fit within the corporate structure, but it can sometimes just take away from the overall brand. There are things that people do and want that don't always gel with the corporation, no matter how well they fit in with the corporation. So that's the third and final one. It seems like you have your characters pretty much filled out. There is one last thing, of course. Yeah, just about every person who passes through this program has a stand. So while you may not again know exactly what your stand does, and keep in mind it doesn't always relate to what you do as a job. For example, Kevka Vaughn's stand has very little to do with enforcement. All it does is measure distance and give him a perfect reading of how far away something is. That's really it. That's all it does. That is not something like cuffing people. It doesn't put giant cartoon handcuffs on them. Doesn't tell him when laws are being broken or anything of that nature. And likewise, you have something like, well, the others actually do kind of fit like what it is that they do fairly decently. Riches is a little bit of a stretch. Being able to have multiple versions of yourself around definitely fits in with networking. The explosion part, not so much. Jeff's ability to vanish people and absorb sunlight really has more to do with his overall ego and his just nature as a person, and very little to do with his actual job. Although you could argue that as a chief executive, his ability to make people disappear who are inconvenient certainly does like fit in with the idea of being able to cut people out when they're like being non-profitable or otherwise harmful to your business. It's really a matter of kind of a mix of those two things. You can either have something that is a very good match with what you do, or you can have something that is it's more of a personal thing